Thanks for joining us today for the fourth and final installment in our virtual panel series about moose hunting in Maine. I'm Emily McCabe, Director of Information and Education at the Maine Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, and I'm joined today by moose biologist Lee Cantor, registered Maine guide and owner of Smoldering Lake Outfitters, Dave Hentosh, and District Game Warden, Ed Christie. In each of the three previous panel discussions, we've touched a little bit on the topic of field care of moose, but today we're going to be taking a deeper dive into the topic, and we'll be hearing from our panelists and some of their best advice and recommendations on how to be prepared to take on the responsibility of handling, field dressing, and properly caring for a moose after successful harvest. If you missed any of our previous presentations, you can still check them out by visiting mefishwildlife.com/moose lottery. And I will be adding a link to that in the comments for you. So I want to start out by having each of our panelists tell a little bit about themselves, their involvement in the moose hunt, and the area of the state they work and live in. So let's start with Lee.
Hey, good afternoon. Yep, my name is Lee Cantor. I'm the state's moose biologist. So as I like to say, I go wherever the moose are, but certainly spend a lot of my work, field work up in the north part of the state, as well as the Moosehead region.
And Dave, you want to give a little introduction?
Sure. Hello, I'm Dave Hentosh, owner of Smoldering Lake Outfitters and founder of the Veterans of Field Foundation. We are located in the northeastern portion of our of the state in Aroostook County, around Bridgewater, and hunt moose in the northern tier. We also host Maine's Disabled Veteran Moose Hunt.
Awesome. And joining us for the first time this round, Ed Christie, welcome. You want to give a little introduction?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Ed Christie. I've been a district game warden for 22 years. I patrol the Caribou area. I've got the northern part of Zone 6 and the southern part of Zone 3.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us again for what I think is a really important discussion. And as I mentioned, we have decided to dedicate a full discussion today just to the topic of field care moose. Over the years, we found it to be one of the most critical parts of the hunt for participants to be prepared for. Lee, could you start out by sharing a little bit of your thoughts on why you feel this topic is so important and why hunters need to take this very seriously as they're preparing for their hunt this fall?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons. And, obviously the first reason starts with the idea that, a moose provides hundreds of pounds of quality, organic, local grown meat, so to speak. A smaller moose, like a smaller 3-year-old bull moose, could give you over 300 pounds of meat. And so that can feed a family, feed a lot. And so it's imperative that, you've spent all this time and interest in going on a moose hunt, and now the day arrives and you want to be prepared ahead of time so that you can have the highest quality meat and not waste anything. And so what goes along with that as well is that, and we've said this before, but every year we have people come to the check station, and the first thing they say after they shot their first moose is they get to the moose and they can't believe how big it is. And, I'm not being, flip about that, but yeah, it's a large animal. And when it's down, it's not going anywhere and you're not moving it anywhere. So, typically Maine hunters have developed all kinds of creative ways to get the whole moose out, which is not required. And do you need to go to that length? We understand that everybody's hunt is unique and different, and that's on them. But you can also choose a different route as well by learning proper field care, whether that's something where you quarter the moose, whether you do a gutless method, or you do a traditional gutting method and take the whole moose out. But again, it's imperative that you're well prepared for that. And just one more quick comment is the other idea behind doing a quartering method is that it opens up a whole new world of hunting for everybody. So, we always hear back from people who spent a lot of time driving. And in more remote areas, you have to be concerned about fuel and all that type of stuff. And then, interference by other hunting parties. Well, you start walking in the woods after a moose, feeling confident in your head that you can quarter a moose and get it out that way, and you've opened up a whole new world of hunting. And that's something to think hard about.
Sorry, that segues perfectly into my next question, which, I was going to shoot over to you, Dave. We have talked a little bit about what Lee was just mentioning of how the hunt of 15 or 20 years ago, or the hunt that your dad or uncle went on, particularly in northern Maine, is quite a bit different than the hunt of today. And those differences can really relate back to why being prepared for field care is important, and how being on board with quartering your moose can really open up more opportunity for you. Dave, can you talk a little bit about, what a hunter needs to think about in terms of the process of handling such a large game animal after they've made a successful kill, and in this day and age, in this type of hunt, what they should be prepared for and consider?
So for me personally, and this is a personal preference, even if the animal that we harvest is easily accessible, we could drive a pickup to it, I'm going to look to quartering it. There are other methods, and in the veterans moose hunt, we have food safety and other rules that we have to adhere to. So we use, to get that animal, even though they're easily accessible, into a location that we can field dress or quarter them. We load them in an extra large tote, like an otter sled, the extra large size. And 2 people can easily manipulate an animal, roll them on onto their side, lay the tote over top of them, and use their legs to lift up and lay it in the tote, and then drag it out to a safe area that you can handle it. So, getting an animal out whole, moving it to where you can easily work on it, that's some equipment and a method that you could utilize. But to me, quartering does a number of different things for you. Number one, you're looking at an animal that's, Lee said, is very large. Because of that mass, it holds its heat very well. They've also they're growing their hair for a winter coat, so they're well insulated from that perspective as well. By quartering, you're releasing that heat. You're taking off the outer insulative layer. If you think about today's Yeti cooler, will hold ice for a week. Well, it'll hold heat for a week also. By removing the hide and breaking that into smaller pieces, you just went from a Yeti cooler to a cheap styrofoam cooler that might hold ice for half a day. It's going to help that animal dissipate the heat quickly, which is going to slow down, any of your bad bacteria growth that's going to spoil meat. Also, and probably more importantly, a moose is a lot easier to handle one piece at a time than he is, whole. So getting it out of the woods, getting it back to your truck, back to camp, is a whole lot easier when it's quartered. And if you're in a remote area, game bags are essential when quartering. You're in a remote area, even if it's warm. Hunts all across the country happen in 70 to 80 degree temperatures. And some of the work that we did in Colorado, we were shooting elk in the high country in 80 degrees, but you quarter it, get it in the game bag, and hang it and get air around it. It creates kind of a protective crust, if you will. And that meat is still cooling from its body temperature. That gives you more time to get out of the woods and back to civilization. Get it to the tagging station and then to the butcher in a cooler. Obviously, you want to do that as soon as you can, but by quartering and breaking that animal down, you're really improving the quality of the table fare.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate goal, right? Lee, do you want to add a little bit to that too? I think you and Dave have done a great job preparing some educational materials, a video series for hunters that we put out last year that showed hunters how to use what you call the gutless method in quartering a moose. And I will definitely add a link to that in just a minute so viewers can make use of that. What, from your perspective, Dave just gave a ton of reasons why this method is ideal. Anything you want to add in terms of why those methods are really the way to go in 100% of the situations?
Well, I give most of the credit, if not all of it, to Dave. I was just holding the dumb end of the moose, but yeah, I mean, we've talked about many reasons for doing it this way. I saw that there's always people who have a different way of doing it. I think the bottom line here is that, number one, in the last however many years you want to talk about, and Ed can certainly attest to this, is that we've had many of our September, October, and late October seasons where weather has been incredibly unseasonable, where we're talking about, even in Caribou, where Ed is, temperatures well into the 70s, if not higher. And so now you're talking about taking a moose and having literally a race against time. And if you're taking the whole moose out, and exactly what Dave said, which is, you change that whole game. And, many of us would prefer to just do this no matter what the temperatures are out. But when the temperatures are hot, now you're now you're not going to have a choice, really, is what it comes down to. And so having these tricks or tools in your repertoire are really important. And yeah, Dave, we have some videos out that show the gutless method and a traditional gutting method, which we talk about opening up the chest cavity, cutting right up through the ribs in the sternum to open it right up to the neck to expose the whole inside. I mean, we see everything at Moose Check Station with ice and all this type of stuff. But, I'll also make the comment, of course, that, like Dave says, is you got a thick hide on a moose, and the inside of a moose is 100 degrees. And all of that has to escape one way or the other. And if it takes you 4 hours to get out of the moose from where it was shot dead, and you eviscerate that moose, I mean, we see people who eviscerate the moose and leave part of the stomach. I mean, we see everything. And so in one of the videos, he shows how to take that out the traditional way, if that's where you want to go, where you take everything out, because the last thing you want to do, of course, is spill any of, especially the liquefied stomach contents or urine on any of the meat. And of course, we know that inside the cavity of the moose, you have access to the tenderloins, which is one of the best cuts. You don't want to spoil that. And we know that dirt is the enemy, and hair is the enemy. And so taking some time to look at some of these methods in these videos will go a long way to preserving meat quality and all the things we talked about for hunter success.
Thanks, Lee. So Ed, I was going to ask you, because I know you've been working for a lot of years up in the northern part of Maine, and I'm sure you've experienced a number of hunts. What are some of the common scenarios you've seen in some of the more recent years that you would share with a new hunter before they head out? Maybe like one scenario of where you've seen hunters like really on their game, prepared, and maybe a scenario where not so much.
Well, you kind of run into both sides of the hunting. You get some real serious hunters that have all the gear. They're very prepared. Then you have the other side of it, and I think what they do is they don't do enough research, and they've listened to stories, and they think you just get up first thing in the morning, Monday morning, drive out to a farmer's field, and there's a whole herd of moose there. Pick what one you want, drop it in the field, back the truck up, and you're all done. And like we were talking last night, moose hunting in northern Maine and around the state it's getting to be more like deer hunting. You've got to do some scouting. You've got to get your ducks in a row to get a quality hunt. And a lot of them will bring a couple 100 feet of rope thinking that that's going to be enough. And we get several calls throughout the week where they've shot it at the edge of a field, and it's run 300-400 yards down into the woods, into the swamp. It's 75 degrees. What are we going to do? And I always suggested, and I've always told other hunters that if I ever killed a big moose, I'd do my photos right in the woods with it, and then quarter the thing up and take it out. And one of the first years that I was on, I actually got a complaint about these moose that had been illegally killed off the end of a broccoli field. And when I went and looked at them, I quickly learned that I knew who had dispatched those moose just because the way that it was gutted. And I remember talking to Dave about how he takes care of them in the field. So I knew right away that it was Dave and some nuisance moose in the broccoli fields. And I've always offered that information to hunters that, you don't have to gut it. Just, do this gutless method, and it's quick, it's easy, and it's simple. But yeah, moose hunting it's like deer hunting now. You got to do some scouting. And around the farm country, any of the farmers will, if you get a hold of them, get a hold of one of us, we can get you a contact, and the farmers are more than happy to bring a tractor down. We've got some broccoli growers up here that will sell you a truckload of ice, one right here in Caribou. And so that's another big thing is they want to keep it whole. And when they get it on the back of the truck or they put it on a trailer, the first thing they want to do is wrap it up in a tarp to keep the dirt off it. And they're heading back to southern Maine to have it butchered. And I don't know how many spoil throughout the season. It's got to be a fair amount. But if you get drawn for that September hunt, you want to make sure you've got something lined up for a lot of ice. Get that hide off, get it opened up, and get some air flowing around it.
So this question's really for, I guess, any of you, and just for the sake of discussion, if one of the reasons hunters are sort of committed to wanting to get that moose out whole, and it's maybe about the trophy and considerations for taxidermy, is there any reason why the gutless method or quartering a moose causes an issue when it comes to doing a taxidermy mount? Or, I mean, as Ed said, or your photos right out there in the woods, so you can capture that part. Is there anything hunters need to know about in terms of the taxidermy side of things, if that's on their mind when they're making a decision about field care?
So if you want, I'll jump in. In the video that Lee and I worked on, we showed people kind of laid it out of how to cape that animal for a shoulder mount, at least. But without a doubt, we've skinned and quartered animals for life-size mounts in the field. There's certainly, all your options are open to you. The main thing that a taxidermist is going to need is 8 to 12 inches. If you give them 8 to 12 inches of hide from behind the shoulder for their cape, they're going to have plenty of cape. One thing that I would mention, if you're dragging that animal through a clear cut, up a road blank, and onto your truck, the shoulder is what's dragging. You're going to pull a lot of hair off of that animal and damage the cape, damage your, pristine mount, if you will. Whereas when you quarter that animal in the field and take the cape off there, the hide is not going to be damaged either. That's also going to cool down faster. You leave the animal in the round and the heat stays there. One of the first things that's going to happen is that the bacteria is going to be allowed to grow, and you might have the chance of hair slippage and losing your cape from that perspective. So quartering really is a big advantage to having a shoulder mount done, or any mount for that matter.
Yeah, and I'll add here that, and Ed can back me up here, which is what are the legal requirements for tagging a moose. And so, obviously all moose have to go to a registration station. You have to have your license and your permit, and you have to register that moose. But as far as the biological data that we want from that moose, we like to have the tooth, which obviously the hunter can cut out him or herself, the canine tooth. You have to have evidence of gender, and we've changed that so that for a bull, if you're not wanting to do a big mount or whatever, you can actually cut off the skull plate. So you're taking the skull plate and the antlers with all your meat, and you have evidence of gender. And for a female, we're requesting and would really like for people to bring in both ovaries, which could be used as evidence of gender, so that if you bring in those two ovaries, you would not have to haul out the cow's head, which is heavy. And so people should pay attention. We have the Maine Moose Hunters Guide, which people can look at on our website, and it outlines those rules and regulations. But people obviously a lot of people want to weigh their moose. That is not required. The department does not require you to weigh a moose. And honestly, if we have the tooth, and we usually get 90 to 95% of all moose harvested every year, we get a tooth that we then age, and we put that age on the website so you can see how old your moose is. If I know something about the age of your moose and the spread of its antlers, we can be pretty darn close telling you how much that moose weighed. Now, I get it when somebody's killed a smasher they think is over 1,000 and they want to get that there, but there's ways to get that information, and if there's a choice and it's the temperatures are rising in the 40s and they're warmer than your refrigerator, and it's going to be a while till you're getting out to a station, you're going to want to quarter that moose, whether it's 1,000 pounds or not, and do the right thing. It's the ethical thing. And the thing is that always drives me crazy about us and how we hunt in Maine is that you go to Alaska and it's a remote hunt wherever you go for the most part, right? Except around Fairbanks or Anchorage. Well, out there, you're required to take all edible meat, including the muscle between the rib cage. And it doesn't matter if you're out there on a hunt for 9 days and you got a grizzly chasing you down. That doesn't matter. You need to do that. And that's just, Western states are very used to taking elk and moose and large animals and dealing with that. And I got to tell you one other quick story, since it's only 1:28, but I was out on a antelope hunt in Wyoming last fall, and they were also elk hunting up high. We saw a guy come down the mountain, high elevation, on a cold day with an elk. And not only had he opened up that elk and had the cavity wide open and done all the right things there, but he had that thing full of snow and everything else. And I don't think the temperatures were above 40 that day. And it just struck me as here's somebody who did everything and then some to make sure that he had a moving refrigerator for that cause out there. And, you got to do what you got to do when it starts to warm up.
So just to go back a little bit on the legal requirements, I mean, we know that it's not legally required to bring in the whole moose. And maybe you can answer this. Are there things that hunters need to know about transporting the moose, whether they have it whole or they are quartering it from the field to the tagging station? Is there anything that needs to be done differently, or what needs to happen in that for that step?
That seems to be a big thing with people too. They think that they have to bring it out whole, and they don't. Like Lee said, just the edible meat and some way to prove the sex is all we need. And then some people think that they have to have it weighed, and I think some of the weighing stuff is maybe for bragging rights, especially if it's a big bull, and a lot of people kind of would like to know how much it weighed, so when they go to have it butchered, they've kind of got this figure in their head of what they should get back for meat. But like if you bring it all whole, you attach your permit to it, and then if you bring it out in quarters, then just have that permit on a piece of the meat. Obviously, you're going to have 4 quarters and probably a bag or 2 of the back strap and the loins. So, but yeah, we don't require the whole animal to bring to the tagging station. So
great, thank you. So since we're kind of on that sort of line of thought, if somebody is successful, have got their moose out of the field, whether they choose to remove it whole or quarter it, the next step is to think about butchering. And so of course people can butcher their moose on their own if they have the skills and the tools, and maybe one of you who are experienced with that could offer a little suggestion on that. But if they're considering having a meat processor or meat cutter work on it, what are some things that need to be thought about before the hunt to be prepared for that as well? Maybe Dave can answer that one.
Well, so you're going to want to think about the cuts that you want to have them, provide back to you. Steaks, roast, sauce. Do you want sausage? Do you want? Some of those are extra charges for a lot of the butchers. All the butchers have a little different, I guess, scale, if you will, for charging. Some charge by the pound for carcass weight, some charge by the pound for hanging weight or dressed weight. Others, if it's quartered, they have a flat rate charge for that animal. And a lot of people are concerned about how it's packaged. Is it vacuum sealed? Is it wrapped in butcher paper? Is it wrapped in paper and then cellophane and heat sealed? All of those are fine methods. My personal preference is the butcher paper and the cellophane heat sealed. That doesn't, to me, when you're moving things around in the freezer, that seal still holds. In the past, I was a huge proponent of the vacuum sealing because it seemed like I think the wrapped and then heat sealed in the cellophane seems to last longer because sometimes your seal on the vacuum sealing will break as you're shuffling things around in the freezer, and then air gets in and you have freezer burn at that point. But
yeah, I've actually seen that happen in my own freezer. Now that you mentioned that, I hadn't thought about it, but definitely the meat that's wrapped in paper has held up better. I have a few packages of vacuum sealed that seal is broken, and I'm bummed to find it in there, a little freezer burned.
Right. I'd also make the comment that I think you were alluding to, which is, already it's August, and the hunter cannot have the expectation next month or in October that they're going to kill their moose on Wednesday, drive out, and then be able to go to a butcher that they have not made contact with. We have butchers every year that drop out. We have new ones that come on. If you haven't done it now, you need to get on the phone today with that butcher, if that's the route you're going, and ensure that you have a place in line and you know where you're going. That's pretty important. If you're not doing it yourself, then you need to have all those things lined out right now and what the expectations are, and get that all wrapped up, no pun intended, right now today, and be ready for your hunt this fall.
Yeah, and I'm just going to drop a link in the comments too of a list of moose meat processors in Maine that hunters can make use of and make sure they get an appointment and make arrangements in advance now.
Another thing to consider is, some people want to have their animal hang for a certain extended period in the cooler before it's cut. If you shoot it late in the week and you're getting ready, let's say you're not from the area that you're going to have it butchered, and you shoot it on Friday or Saturday, well, that butcher at minimum needs to have the animal skinned and in the cooler for at least 24 hours in order for that meat to stiffen up properly and enough for him to cut it. So, and then it's going to be another 24 hours if you're taking it home frozen. So those are some things you need to consider and maybe plan into your trip. Plan for that worst case scenario, hope for the best, right? If you get it early and can get it to the butcher early, then you're earlier in line for his processing, and a lot of them will work well with you. If you're traveling a distance, they'll make sure that they can get it out to you as quickly as possible, but they still, at minimum, it's going to be a 2-day process from when it's brought to them and in their cooler before they can cut it and then get it frozen.
Awesome. Thank you. So do you guys have any final thoughts? I mean, we've talked so much about quartering, and obviously that is really the ideal scenario and something we really want hunters to consider. Any tips or advice or tools or things for someone to prepare for if they're just committed to trying to get that moose out whole? And what should they know about field dressing if they've never field dressed an animal that large? And just some last minute kind of thoughts on that.
I'd just jump in just based on what we see at the check stations and reiterate the fact that I both personally and professionally, I cannot understand why a hunter would not cut up through the rib cage up to the neck. I see so many folks who do the field dressing part and come back to the station like they just were in a horror movie, when you don't need to be covered in blood to do the job, and even a person can do this solo, if you will. You could certainly tie back the legs as necessary, but the bottom line is, you cut up through to the neck. You can reach in there without being blind, and you can reach in there being able to see your hand and make a cut through the trachea esophagus to remove that part and to keep that closed as you pull that out of the cavity. So anyways, I think, Dave's video shows that well. There's many videos, high quality videos that are on the internet that are easy for people to see, and different ways that they do that. But, since you're asking this as kind of a final wrap up, you can't emphasize the fact enough that dirt and that hair is the enemy, as well as warm temperatures. Everybody could bring a small tarp with them, or they can use the actual hide if they go that route to place meat on as they get it into their game bags. But there's lots of information that our department is now providing on the internet, and is worth taking a look at as well.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and share that link. We do have the video that you and Dave put together that just shows, the field dressing methods and how to be prepared for that. And it's very important that hunters educate themselves, prepare themselves for that before they head out on their hunt this year. But I think the point is definitely well made, that there's a ton of advantages to being prepared to quartering that moose and using that method, both from a standpoint of preserving possible mounts or taxidermy that you want to have done, but even more importantly, really good meat, good quality meat. So if somebody, one of our viewers or one of our permittees who's going on the hunt this year has questions for any of you, are you all willing to entertain emails from any of the audience if they have some questions or want to pick your brains about some things before the season starts?
Absolutely.
Great. So I'll just encourage any of the viewers, if they want to drop their email address in the comments, I'll definitely pass them along to you guys. And I think you've all been incredible in sharing your thoughts and experience and advice across this entire series of discussions we've had. And I think that's going to help our hunters this year really experience a true, successful, enjoyable moose hunt in Maine, which is for many people once in a lifetime. So,
and I'll make some additional plugs here, which is, when that video was put together, it was done in several segments with the idea that people could go back and review those videos over and over again. And Dave talks about the use of the knife and the blade and not cutting hair and how important that is. And those details are of really, really significant because of the list of things that people usually bring with them to get the moose out of the woods. And, Ed talked about it and probably has more stories than any of us about regarding the lengths at which people go to twitch a moose out of the woods. And we've talked about this before. We understand that sometimes that's a group of people and that's part of the fun and all that. But, there's also the situations I've seen. And again, Ed and Dave can probably speak to this well, where somebody shoots a moose that looks like a perfect place and the thing runs off and winds up going straight down a hill and wraps itself around a tree. And yet people still are trying to figure a way to twitch that moose out, even though it's in a place that's unbelievable, or a moose that dies in the water, and dealing with these situations. So there's a whole list of these things. But again, take a look at, I think you guys, Emily, have put together a list of things for people to consider and all that. But, it definitely is worth people's time if this is a hunt of a lifetime, to spend a little time really thinking through this next part, which is the moose is down. And everybody likes to say this is when the work begins. But to figure out what their plan A and B is, have their meat cutter all lined up, know what they need to bring out, and know how they're going to do it, and have the right tools for them. So all important stuff.
Yeah, that was really good kind of final thought there, Lee. I appreciate that. And since this is the last of our discussions in the series, I kind of want to open it up to you guys. If there's any, it doesn't even have to be about field care. If there's any final thoughts or well wishes or anything you want to offer to our hunters for this season, you're welcome to do that before we wrap up. Our audience is very quiet today, other than hoping that they can connect with you all via email. They don't have any specific questions. So,
well,
I guess I'd just add that. Go ahead, Dave.
No, after you.
If a novice hunter is drawing a tag, if they got any questions, just have them call one of either our headquarters, leave a message after hours, or call the dispatch center. One of us will get back to them, and we can point them in the direction of, we've got whatever area you're hunting in, we've got these outfitters, or we got these meat cutters, but we've probably got 7 or 8 weeks before the September hunt, so you got a little bit of time to do some homework. But the care and taking care of that meat so it doesn't spoil, that's probably going to be your biggest hurdle to get over, especially in this September hunt. And the way the summer's going, next week it's like going to be in the 80s. So if the trend stays like it has all summer long, we could be in for a really warm September. But never feel bad for asking a question. The only question that's a dumb question is the one that doesn't get asked. And then you've got a 900,000 pound animal that rots in the woods, and it's your first move. So don't hesitate to reach out, and we can get you some resources or point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's a really good point that I would reiterate, that all of our staff really care a lot about the experience our hunters have, and we care a lot about our wildlife, and definitely want to do what we can to make sure everybody going into their hunt this year has a safe and really successful hunt, and they get a nice quality freezer full of meat at home. All right, Dave, you have some thoughts.
Okay. Well, they're truly a majestic animal and deserve our best effort in harvest and then after the harvest. And what I wanted to say was one of the main benefits about the gutless method, especially if an animal has had damage in the intestinal area, is that those intestinal fluids are captured in the abdominal cavity, and you never enter that never touches the meat. When you skin it, quarter it, and remove the inner loins, you can remove them without having to remove the guts. However, if you're scared, if that's overwhelming to you, you can still quarter it. Dress it off first and then quarter it. Be careful in your dressing, that you don't get those bodily fluids out. If you're worried about quartering it that way, simply, remove the intestines, the innards, and then go to continue skinning and quarter it and get it out that way. And if what you want to do is field dress it and remove it, to Lee's point, unless you're going to mount it, then you're going to have to be careful about the cape, especially around the brisket area. But cutting the ribs and opening that up gives you better access to do a better job cleaning everything out. And removal of the esophagus is key, because your field dressing, when you cut the esophagus, if you cut it like near the heart, near where it enters the chest cavity, then the fluids that are in there are going to be released into the chest cavity. So being careful around the bladder, around the stomach, the rumen, the esophagus, all of that, keeping that fluid away is key to having untainted meat in the end. So no matter which way suits you, just take your time and we talk about if it's 80 degrees, you have to, everybody says, oh, you really have to do that fast. And to some degree, that's correct. You have to work responsibly. But you shoot the animal and the animal's dead. It takes about 45 minutes before all of the cells are dead. And anybody that's jumped right in the beginning and sees muscles twitching can understand that the nerve endings are still alive. The cell at the cellular level, things are still alive. So you do have, it's not like you have to rush. You just don't want to stand around for, let it lay there for 2 or 3 hours. Take good pictures. You've only got one time to take the pictures. Set it up, clean it up, make it respectable and something you'd be proud of to show to everyone. And then, get to work on as clean and as possible from like Lee said, the hair and the dirt especially, taking great care to get a quarter off and then dropping it in the mud, you just went back a few steps. But
yeah, and
wish everybody a great success on the hunt. It's certainly a magical, wonderful time to be in the woods.
Yeah, and I'll, along those same lines, as Ed was saying, with the way the summer's been, I believe they're still in a state of a drought up in northern Maine. And so you're going to realize that all of the Northwoods roads right now are going to be a complete dust bowl. And likely come September, it's going to be a complete dust bowl. And so what we often see, of course, is that, so many moose hunters bring a big trailer with them and they haul their moose out on the trailer and they haul their moose out whole and they leave the hide on. So you're fighting all these different factors that need to be reconciled, because it probably makes sense to a lot of people to have, if I'm hauling it out on a trailer, then it probably makes sense to them to have a tarp over it and keep the hide on. But if you're fighting the heat, you're only adding gasoline to the fire. And so I think a lot of those things have to be really considered. Obviously, again, people hate to hear this, but you quarter up the moose and you get that in a bunch of coolers, and then you cover the coolers with a tarp. You can drive down those dusty roads till you're blue in the face, and it's not going to matter. You're going to be pretty well protected. I've taken meat out in the woods in that circumstance when the roads you could barely see, and the coolers keep them pretty good and all that. So, we hope everybody has a safe and great trip out there. We started this whole conversation, 4 panels ago, talking about logistics and, starting where people are going to stay, and basically crossing your T's, dotting your I's with, your hunting party and how your hunt's going to be, where you're going to stay. Now we're talking about what you're going to do after with your meat care, who your meat cutter is going to be. You line out all those things. Hopefully in the next week or so, people get these things all squared out so they can kind of sit back and then just focus on the dream of actually getting out there in cooler fall weather and having the hunt of a lifetime. So, like you said, Emily, we take emails, phone calls. whenever people want to. You'd be surprised how few we actually get. So I certainly welcome that, and would point people in any direction and help them whenever I can. So.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us today. And thanks Lee, Dave, and Ed for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. So again, that wraps up our 4-part series on preparing for your moose hunt. If you missed any of the previous discussions, you can go back and watch them by visiting mefishwildlife.com/moose lottery. And again, those have all been linked in the comments, along with some other good, helpful information. And also on that site, you can view a really great presentation that Lee gave a couple months ago about moose management in Maine. Talks a little bit about winter tick. And that's also really good information as we talk about moose management. So again, we wish you all a very safe and successful moose hunting experience this fall, and we look forward to seeing some nice photos from the field. Talk to you later.